Αγρευθείς ουρανόθεν προσεύσε βίαν ένδοξε, τι τους ιοφθέντος δυνάμει, διελάφου Ευστάθιε, ποικίλους καθυπέστης πειρασμούς, και ίστραψας εν άθλης ιερής, συντήθεια σου συμβίω και της ιης φεδρίνων τους βόντασι. Δόξα το σε δόξας αντιχριστό, δόξα το σε Στεφανός αντί, δόξα το δείξαντις εν παντή, Ιωβ παμάκαρ δεύτερο.
As I mentioned the last presentation toward the end, we find this big movement of relics within the 4th century. And as time goes on, Christians became intentional with going to various places that had relics. Just this movement. If we heard of a particular saint in a particular locale, we'd go. And the intention was just being in proximity to these relics would have some sort of an effect. It had to have some sort of an effect because they were physically present. It wasn't so much just their spiritual presence as we find in any church, but having a relic or a saint in physical proximity was something very special. And that just grew into the psyche of the people. And it wouldn't be that a particular church would be referenced as a shrine. It was simply understood that if you had a relic of your patron saint or your matron saint, that place would be considered a bit more significant, a place of pilgrimage. So for the purpose of the Holy Land, and we look at these various locales where the Lord served, or I should say, where he was born, buried, baptized, taught, and they become places of pilgrimage. And one of the neatest things is going back in history, we can read accounts of folks that visited these various sites, and we can learn of their prayer life there. So one level for us as Orthodox Christians is we can look at this kind of almost pulling back the onion, for lack of a better word, of our liturgical life and develop an understanding of what might have been the case back when, based on how we've seen liturgy evolve. The other thing we can do is just simply go back and read early documents and talk about a particular church. And we learn the piety, we learn the ritual, the who visited, where they traveled from. It just becomes part of that living history. So in our case, we received in 2005, 2006, a relic of Saint Anna. In our case, the conversation, we're the only parish at the time of Saint Anna in our archdiocese dedicated to the Mother of Mary, which I found shocking. And we were a small mission parish. We were at the funeral of our late Bishop Anthony, and there I met this particular father, Hieronym from the Skete of St. Anna Monavos. And I just learned, this was my ignorance, I just learned that the Skete had a relic of St. Anna. So I met Father at the funeral and said, Father, I serve the parish of St. Anna. We're the only one in the United States. Is there a possibility that we could get a relic of St. Anna for our parish from the Skete? He said, no. Okay. That was it. And then about a month later, I received an email because we'd exchanged contacts. And he said, I have another relic of St. Anna that I can give to you. It can't come from the Brotherhood because we have the foot of St. Anna that still is fully intact. And all the fathers, they would have to agree on a piece of that relic being gifted. I said, but I received a relic that I can give to your community. It's about a quarter-sized piece from the skull of St. Anna. So if you could please come and receive it. When? Well, now. Okay. So my father and my father-in-law and I traveled to the Skete of St. Anna to receive the relic of St. Anna. When we received the relic of the parish, which was remarkable, absolutely remarkable, we didn't even have our church built. We were still in an office suite. A local news station learned that we had received this artifact, and they ran a story. Well, over the span of about 4 days, we had 20 news spots. When we celebrated the gifting service under a tent on our site, since again our church wasn't built, and our office suite would hold about 90 people. It was celebrated. We had live broadcasts from NBC, ABC, and CBS for our local affiliates. Live broadcasts. Telemundo, our Spanish-speaking news station, came and broadcast the next day at another service we celebrated. And we started receiving people from all over to come and venerate this particular relic of St. Anna. So the next year, I wanted to learn more about where our relic came from. So the priest in Mount Athos had said that the relic came from Cyprus, and had been in the care of a monk at Kikos Monastery. I said, gosh, okay, well, I've never been to Cyprus. So, traveled to Cyprus, and there at the monastery, I met this young monk who is now a dear friend, and said, can you tell me the history of this relic? I said, well, there was an old nun, Anna, and before I had been tonsured a monk, and Anna was from a monastery in Cappadocia. When the area was no longer inhabitable because of how the Christians were being treated, she fled to the Greek Isles, ended up in Cyprus, and there affiliated, for lack of a better word, with Kikos. Became dear friends with this young novice, and she gifted him the relic, saying, I'm gifting this relic of St. Anna to you. However, if anyone ever asks you for this relic, you're to give it to them. Okay? So this particular priest-monk knew the other priest-monk in Mount Athos because they shared a common elder from Mount Athos, whose name is the Venerable Anthimos of the Skeet of St. Anna. He's not a saint yet. Again, saint. Right? It's organic. When his body was taken up in 1996, I believe that was the year his relics were taken up, the ground was myrrh. Just sweet as myrrh. His bones exuded myrrh. So for the gentleman, if you're able to visit the Skeet of St. Anna, his skull is in the Theophileon Brotherhood, because he was the elder of that little brotherhood. The relic just smells like myrrh. Magnificent. So he has not been commemorated, if you will, by the larger church, but it's understood that he is truly a friend of God. So since they shared a common elder, when Father Cherubim asked this other monk and said, they were in a conversation, and Father Cherubim said, at the Skeet of St. Anna, we have the foot of St. Anna, but if we had a relic of St. Anna, our own brotherhood, I would love to build a chapel dedicated to St. Anna as well. Father Frem said, I have a relic of St. Anna. He said, well, he went to bed that evening, he just left it with that. He said, in the middle of the night, he woke up, and standing next to him, as he was laying in his bed, was the nun Anna, who had since proposed, and said, remember what I told you. He said, so that hour he got up, and he went and he gifted the relic to Father Cherubim. And that's really as much as we know about this particular relic. As far as how it got into the care of Anna, I can't tell you. The majority of St. Anna's relics are the skull or endure in Germany in a Roman Catholic cathedral. So I was curious though. We have St. Anna. We are also in the valley of San Joaquin, of St. Joachim in California. So wouldn't it be great if we could get a relic of St. Joachim? So we went on this big process of looking for a relic of Joachim. And after exhausting many a source and working with a cardinal, a blessed memory in Baltimore, who was assigned to a particular titular church in Rome in which they had a relic of St. Joachim that had been misplaced, I finally learned that the Skeet of St. Anna, go figure I could have started with them at the onset, had a relic of St. Joachim. So what we learned at that time was these particular relics of St. Joachim and Anna had been gifted to the Theophileon Brotherhood by the Archdiocese of Cologne, Germany, which is considered to be the second most prestigious, for lack of a better word, maybe diocese of the Roman Catholic world, outside of Rome itself. Well, the relics of Joachim and Anna had ended up the relics of Joachim and Anna. Well, take a step back. This is where it becomes fun with investigative work. How do relics end up where they end up? So there are folks that are referred to as hagiographies that study the lives of the holy ones. So in addition to knowing their stories, can actually do investigative work to figure out how somebody has what they say they have. So he went in and started investigating how did these relics of Joachim and Anna end up in Cologne, Germany? Well, what they found out was these relics had been taken to France, the Provence region, by Charlemagne. The Germans received them, because they took them, from the French out of their piety and love for Saints Joachim and Anna. So they've been in France, but where did Charlemagne get them from? Well, from the Holy Land. took them to France to establish his rule. So those relics of Joachim were the first relics gifted to Mount Athos from the Archdiocese of Cologne from the split in the 11th century. And when we received them, we celebrated our gifting service for those particular relics. So we started off in the Roman Catholic Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament in Sacramento to engage the Roman Catholic world. Since they'd been in the care of Rome for so long, let's come together for this one. So the Bishop of Sacramento processed the relics in a beautiful reliquary that had been gifted to us by the Brotherhood. And to a packed cathedral of 1,000 people, in a solemn vespers, the Roman Catholic bishop spoke, our metropolitan spoke, and at the close of the service, our metropolitan took the relics out to then install them in our parish the next day. And at that time, we had been speaking with our metropolitan, and with the ongoing assault of marriage and family here in the United States, I said, well, we've got the relics of Joachim and Anna that are referenced by every Orthodox church in the world. They are patrons of marriage. They are patrons for those that labor to have children. Anna is the one that many women will pray to at the time of conception that they be granted a safe delivery. Well, why don't we make them the saints of marriage and family for our metropolis? So we did. The Metropolitan offered this beautiful prayer following our reception of those relics on September, I believe it would be September 5th. And that day, our parish became a shrine dedicated to the sanctity of marriage and family. Now, nowhere in the Orthodox world do we have churches that are referenced, this is the first of its kind, saying this is dedicated to this particular ministry. Because the reality is every parish is meant to build up marriage and family. Every aspect of marriage and family. Those that are laboring to marry, those that are married, those that are in good marriages, those that are in bad marriages, those that have left marriages, those who are widowed, those that are married to Christians, those that are married to non-Christians. The local church is meant to be the hub for all of those individuals. But we thought it wise, at least within our metropolis, to say we have these gifts. How can we create a ministry that is fitting of these particular relics for us? So that was really a prayerful conversation for us, and we attempted to at least work through it, and we're still working through it. But initially, we started receiving prayer requests from all over the world for folks that were laboring to conceive of children. And for those that have, if any of the men have visited the Skeep St. Anna Monathos, there's a beautiful miracle working icon that's, oh goodness, it's probably about this big at the Skeep. And at the base of that icon are children, little babies, that have been born through the prayers of St. Anna. So after a couple conceives or delivers a child, they return pictures to the Skeet. So we said, well, okay, we'll start praying for couples. We're being asked to pray for couples, we'll pray for them. We'll also forward their names to the Skeet of St. Anna. And before you know it, we start getting little pictures sent to us too, of kids that have been born through the prayers of St. Anna. Well, if we're praying for them, how do we pray for them? Well, we'll commemorate them in proscomidi. We'll send them to the Skeet to be prayed for on a regular basis. Well, there's an agathist to St. Anna. So that hasn't been translated. Okay, we've got to translate it. So this professor of classics at University of Santa Barbara, who had a sister in our parish, now Vesiconus of blessed memory, translated an agathist to St. Anna, who we pray on a yearly basis. Well, then there's a paraclesis, a service of supplication to Saints Joachim and Anna, that we pray on a regular basis now in our parish. And we commemorate all those names that have been given to us to pray for couples that are attempting to conceive. Well, then all of a sudden we have families contacting us saying, well, we've conceived, can you pray for us so we can have a safe delivery? Absolutely. So then the prayer list grew. Then, just in the past 2 years, we've had folks that have contacted us saying, I'd really like to get married. Just having a difficult time right now finding someone. Can you keep me in your prayers? Absolutely. So we've got our third list. We've got those that are desiring marriage and preparing for marriage. We've got those that have desired to conceive of children, and those that have conceived, that they be granted safe delivery. Well, then it was, in addition to praying for them, what can we send them? So, we just simply started producing little icons because Roman Catholics, most notably, want things that have come in contact with relics. And it's not uncommon with relics to see in our countries, going back into Orthodox lands, of people taking prayer ropes and blessing them on the relics. Roman Catholics are good about taking handkerchiefs and blessing them on the relics. Or rosaries. And handkerchiefs will go back to the tradition of even the shadow of St. Peter passing over individuals, and that being enough to bring healing. So we started blessing icons on the relics, And we have a starter oil from the skeet of St. Anna that burns in proximity to now a copy of that much larger icon that we have. And we take oil, we bless the oil, and we ship it all over the world. So just this past week, someone had contacted me from somewhere on the East Coast requesting oil or requesting prayers. So we immediately sent off icons, bless the relics, along with holy oil. There's a group from the Philippines that comes to our parish, or from the United States, from a particular region of the Philippines, that come probably every 3 or 4 years, because that particular region venerates St. Anna, they're Roman Catholics. So they come and we celebrate a service of supplication of Saints Joachim and Anna around the Feast of St. Anna about every 4 years. We welcome people from throughout the world that come to just stand and pray over the relics of St. Anna. And since that time, we're collecting other relics, because for us, it's a matter of finding ourselves in this space, being surrounded by the saints. And a few of you from Cyprus, in Kikos Monastery, what used to be a small room that was just set aside for baptism and kind of a storage room, they've since converted into a space that's probably, actually, it's almost the size of this chapel, maybe from about here back. And there are cases all the way around the room that are filled with relics. Case after case after case. And when you're standing in the room, I mean, it's just, you can't believe it. You're just, everywhere you look, they're just relics. And it's one of the most remarkable spaces. So the relics have truly impacted us to great degree. We haven't built our church yet. As I mentioned, construction costs in California are horrific. What was supposed to be a $4.7 to $5.3 million project, all of a sudden, because of the fires in Napa, the fires in Paradise, and our economy going up again, has risen to about an $8.5 to $9.3 million project. Right? So we're taking our time. Unfortunately, we can't afford that yet. But in our iconographic plan, well, how do we make these relics accessible to people? How do we build up marriage? So the thought was, imagine now coming into the church, and this will be my last point on ours, and we're going to shift to Saint Efstathios. Coming into the church, and as you go, imagine there being stations around the church, candles, just places where you can light candles. Imagine seeing Abraham and Sarah that are pivotal in our history, but we don't often give them a lot of space, even though they're in the wedding rite. And imagine going to these various couples throughout history, going and lighting a candle, and reading the Apollitikon, their feast day hymn, and going from place to place to place. Say as an engaged couple, as a couple celebrating an anniversary, maybe that's the first level. Imagine going all the way around, and then ending up at the relics of Joachim and Anna, and being able to light a candle there, and then having the priest come out and offer prayer with you as you prepare for marriage, as you celebrate an anniversary, as whatever it might be. But then saying, gosh, well, that's an aspect of our Christian family. We won't be exclusive. So if we look back into history, well, we have those of us that have been widowed. So it's important to have individuals in iconography that have been widowed. We have those in our tradition that were divorced. We have those within our tradition that were in abusive relationships. These are all saints, mind you, holy men and women that were in abusive relationships. We have some that were married to non-Christians and yet found wholeness in Christ. So why not depict them on the walls of the church? That's part of our living faith. So that's how we've received our relics and how we continue to have this conversation about how they impact not simply us as a parish, but our greater region. And the last beautiful tradition that we do, we celebrate informal engagements. So there'll be a young couple next Sunday that was just engaged on Christmas. We've invited their families at the close of the Divine Liturgy. We invite the couple up, and we will formally or informally bless their engagement. But the way we do it is by having the ring, the engagement ring, put on the relic of St. Anna, doing our appropriate prayers, chanting the Apollitikon, and the ring is then given to the bride-to-be. And when the wedding rite is prayed, we have the relics of Joachim and Anna on the tray, with the groom's ring on the the relic of Joachim, and the bride's ring being on the relic of Anna. So that's just who we are. It works for us. It's not contrived, it was just organic and natural. So having a relic of a patron saint really is something special. And it lends itself to a degree of creativity of what do we do with it? How do we serve others because of it? we're blessed with it. Again, what do we do? Any questions so far? Or thoughts?
Is anybody tempted or challenged you to do a DNA analysis?
I'll tell you, I welcome it, and I'm so excited about doing that.
So
Because-
you would be okay with the church?
Hmm?
You would be okay with the church?
They would be clever and crafty ways of doing it. What I would love, and I had started storyboarding it some years ago, and the idea would be looking to where we know that there are relics. We know that there are relics of St. Anna around the world, Roman Catholic churches, Orthodox churches. Having a DNA test would be brilliant. It would have to be done in such a way where we would not shame any community that didn't have the right one, right? Because there's a living faith around it. There's a story that also talks about authenticated relics for pieces of the cross. It says today, if you were to collect the pieces of the cross, where everyone says they have a piece of the cross, if you were to collect it, the wood, the cross wouldn't even fit in this room because it's gotten so big from all these pieces of wood that exist. There's a story that says that there was a man that had gone on pilgrimage to the Holy Land and had requested that he bring back a piece of the cross for a friend that was sick, deathly sick, that couldn't make the trip. And what folks would do at the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, or at the time when they had the cross, is if this were the cross to venerate, they'd have a deacon on the one side, and they'd be watching people venerate the cross. So what people would do is they'd go down to their prostration, and they'd bite a piece of the cross to take a piece of the cross with them. So it says this man went back to wherever he was on his way back and realized he didn't get a piece of the cross for his friend. So since he was on the ship, it said he took a piece of wood off the ship and they gave it to his friend and said, I brought you a piece of the cross. The man venerated with faith and was healed. So we would never want to trivialize what a parish has. But I think the next coolest thing is you have the icon up there of the icon made without hands, which is a whole other retreat and conversation, but one of the most fascinating icons because it takes us back to Mount Sinai and the first adult image of Jesus, and the blood on the Shroud of Turin is the same blood that is on another image, that is another cloth that is found in Spain. And what I would love to do is get the DNA of St. Anna and see if it matches up with those two garments. That would authenticate all of them. So there's all sorts of possibility, and it's the creativity, not being afraid of it. History and science are our friends. And the more and more we go back into orthodoxy, the more and more actually the Western world keeps affirming what we already know. And if by chance we're wrong, no, it's not somehow trivializing our faith or minimizing what we have. It's thanking God also because God works through things that aren't even what we say they are. That's the beauty.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Η μαμά μου έχει πάει στα Ιεροσόλυμα. Στο βρήκε, πέρασε από ένα μέρος, δεν ξέρω πού και πώς, αλλά έχει ένα κομμάτι relic και το είχε στο σπίτι και τώρα η μαμά μου έχει πεθάνει. Πώς ξέρεις ότι είναι πραγματικά relic από Άγιο?
So in Jerusalem, mother wasn't going to the Holy Land and was gifted somewhere a relic of a saint from the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And how do you authenticate it, or?
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know. I guess the question would be trying to learn a little bit more about maybe where in the Holy Land she received it, if it was from a particular monastery, what saints the monastery. But the question would be which. Those would be some of the questions you'd have to investigate. A relic that, so in addition to the relic of Saint Efstathios, there'll be another relic that Father Luke will be, at least a portion that he'll be bringing here, will be a relic of one of the Holy Fathers of the monastery of Saint Efstathios that is in Palestine. When we were there, the Fathers gifted Father Constantine and I relics of the Holy Fathers, whose feast day was actually 2 Sundays ago. So you'll have another relic here, and what's going to be important for Father Luke is simply to make a document of saying these relics were gifted on this date, and this is how they got here. And that would be the way we would affirm it, of kind of working backwards of authentication. And that would probably be the best way. Okay. So, to shift gears a little bit, I'd like to, now let's focus in on Saint Efstathios, because this is just beautiful saint of the church. So, his feast day is on September 20th. There'll be a sheet that'll be given later that will have his Apolitikion, his Kundakion, and then also a prayer that was written by Saint Nikolai commemorating Saint Efstathios, which is just a beautiful prayer, this ongoing living veneration of the saint. So what the iconography here tells us, and I'm going to try filling in a few points along the way, is that he was first what? Based on his dress, he was a soldier. And not just a soldier, he was actually a revered soldier. And he was considered so virtuous and so honorable, in addition to being an incredible, saying his name would make folks tremble. But he was considered so virtuous that God saw his work and his wife's work and said, they're pagans. But out of God's love for them, God had to save them. He had to reveal himself to them because it was illogical that somebody so virtuous couldn't find salvation. I think it's amazing to think that that's actually the work. So when we look at the good works of others in the world today, right, so much good work that's done without folks even being Christian, sometimes we can be rather pompous in our approach whether they're not Orthodox, and the works aren't good. Really? Tell that to somebody who's hungry that was just given food, that the work wasn't good. We affirm the goodness. And what do? Affirming the goodness, we share what truth is, with love, not with criticism. So God revealed himself as Saint, what was it, Efstathios? Yeah, Efstathios was out hunting. He was with a group, they had gone out, they were hunting deer, and it says he saw one large buck running ahead, and he stayed behind it, and his others fell behind as he got there, and then when he went looking at the majesty of this buck, and figuring out just how he was going to approach it, all of a sudden, a voice comes and says, "Why are you pursuing me?" Well, as you see in the image, in between the antlers, a cross appeared, and that's where the voice was coming from. And it really, you would imagine, through the saint, or Efstathios, who was unfamiliar, truly unfamiliar with God in this manifestation, but was intrigued, obedient, falling on the ground, listens, and was so moved by the experience that says he goes back to his wife without telling anyone else, and goes to his wife, which I think there's beautiful merit, right? Going just to his wife, not telling everyone else, but goes to his wife. Says, "This is what happened today." And it says that his wife even had some sort of vision that said that something special was going to happen. And immediately together they decided that it was appropriate for them at the direction of God to go and get baptized. And they went and received baptism. As the Lord said, "Go to a Christian priest and be baptized, and he shall indicate to you the path of salvation." He was given the name of Eustachio in holy baptism, his wife the name Theopiste, and their two sons, Agapios and Theopistios. So we see in this icon here the family approaching the waters of baptism. Following baptism, it's clever. The Lord says to him, essentially, you're going to be glorified, but do you want to suffer now, or do you want to suffer later? Because this is part of your perfection. And Eustathios said, well, I'd rather suffer now and have, in a sense, glory restored than suffer in the end. So it says that they were already such a virtuous family, wanting to really focus on Christ. At this point, decided to live simple lives by grace. And it says his wife, upon hearing these words, said, "May the Lord's will guide us. Only let us fervently pray that in his compassion he grant us patience." And so they began to live honorably in piety, patiently abiding in fasting and prayer, giving alms more abundantly than before to the poor, and exercising themselves in every virtue more zealously than they had their previous life of excellence. So within a matter of days of saying this, all of a sudden a sickness came within their household, and it wiped out all of their livelihood. Many of the folks got sick and ended up dying that were caring for their animals. Well, they're not being cared for. Others came in and stole much of what they had. So in a matter of days, their wealth was gone. And it's interesting, it says Eustachio wasn't troubled by that. He would have Old Testament examples, for instance, of Job to look back on. And also just the sense of peace that had come over both of them, just trusting by patience. And it says Eustathios comforted his wife so that she would not be saddened by that which had occurred, and she in turn consoled him. Again, just what a beautiful image of husband and wife together. Eustathios determined to hide himself in a faraway country from all of acquaintances, to conceal his high rank and nobility amid commoners, living humbly in poverty, so that far from every hindrance and all turmoil, he might labor for Christ our Lord. And this is where the story gets all the more trying. So it says with his family, they decided to depart, and they went by boat to this faraway land. And upon arriving in the land, the captain of the ship said, essentially, "Thanks for traveling. Your wife is staying with me." Said, "No, she can't. She's with me and the kids, and we're going to go off the boat together." "Mm-mm. She's staying with me. That's your fee for being passed from one place to another." He said, again, just, "No, this is my wife. This is their mother." He said, "If you don't go, you're going to die. I'll kill you, and there will be no better fate for her." So with that, there's this image that's written that he had no choice. He took his two sons, and they got off the boats, and just watched the wife and mother sail away. And you can imagine just that grief that he experienced, that she experienced, that the kids experienced. Well, the stories continue that after he lamented for a bit, they come to a river, and being that his two kids were young, it says it was impossible for him to carry both kids across the water at the same time. So instead, he left one son on one bank, and took the one son in his arms to carry across the river. Got him to the other side, set his son down, and was in the midst of the river. And he looks back, and the one son, all of a sudden, is being dragged away by a lion. And he's looking in absolute disbelief. He's helpless in the middle of the river. He can't do anything. His one son is being taken away. And just as he's processing what's happening, he looks near the bank as he starts to go, and there's a pack of wolves that start coming toward his other son. And he sees his other son being dragged away by a wolf. So this man standing in the water, and the hymnographer, the saint that documents his life, says, "Truly it was a wonder that he remained alive and did not slip beneath the waters, spent as he was by his tribulations." Just in a matter of days, he loses his wife and two boys. And how easy it would have been just to slip under the water. I was telling Father Luke, it was interesting that in one writing, folks have built off this understanding to say, now this is a saint when folks are contemplating, or when we have a family member that might be contemplating taking their own life. This is one of those things that ought to be a go-to. Because when we think we've got it bad at moments, that's really bad. Wife and two kids gone. After gathering his composure, for lack of a better word, it says he ended up going to a village and there toiled, no one knowing of his status, and taking jobs that did not befit a general, but he worked diligently and worked for the simplest of gifts of food or such. He lived a simple life as a servant. And it says he exercised nothing in his homelessness besides prayer, fasting, weeping, and vigils. With sighs of his heart, lifting up his eyes, hands, and heart into God, and awaiting for mercy from his compassion. And unbeknownst, well, we transition. Working as he was in this village, Roman authorities were really perplexed by what happened to him and his family. He just disappeared. And they were curious. And they needed him because there was more of a potential onslaught now from enemies. They were no longer able to offer up this name Plecotus as this great warrior because they didn't know what happened to him. So two of his dear friends said, he was our good friend. We're going to find him. We will go to the ends of the earth to find this man, whatever it takes. So the emperor was thrilled. Two friends went off in search of him. And says, really, by God's grace, they came to this particular village to rest. And Plecotus recognized his friends. Didn't say anything. Said, what can I do for you? Oh, we came looking for this general, the military. Have you seen him? Have you seen his family? Said, I haven't seen him. But you look tired, your horses look thirsty. My master will feed you. Come in. Just at least enjoy some hospitality. So it says as they sat at table, Efstathios was just so filled with joy seeing his friends. It was just hard for him to almost control his weeping. Just so overjoyed. And there have been moments, I think, for all of us where you, joke for me now is, my father, this is my father's fault, would cry at everything that was just joyful or just sappy. I find myself the same way now. I'll watch movies or just even commercials, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm crying. Because it's just really, there's certain things that are affecting. And after loss of my wife, I'm affected by things all the more. So it says he was so overjoyed at seeing his friends, but he didn't want to just serve them. Then at one point, one of them said, that guy looks really familiar. Can that be Plecotus? No, it can't be. They kept looking. It's got to be him. I said, well, what we do know about our general is he had a scar on his neck. So if he's got a scar, that's him. So when he came back over, they asked where the man was from. A little bit of conversation ensues, They look, and he had a scar on his neck. I said, you're Plecotus. I said, yes, I am. Well, there was a big celebration in this village, and questions about, what are they celebrating? Well, you all didn't even realize you had a Roman general here. What? Well, the town was, the master of the town was overwhelmed by this. His person. Why didn't you tell us? Oh my God, we've been making you wait on us. So it threw everything into a little bit of a frenzy anyway. He was restored fully to his splendor of being a Roman general. And it says as they were preparing to go into battle, since he was restored, they needed him to lead their armies. They realized they didn't have a lot of soldiers. So the story continues that he requested of the emperor to please find us any young men that are able to help serve in the military. Because we need to we need to gather our troops because we're just completely outnumbered. So it says these folks came in from near and far, these young men to fight, and they were two brothers or two young men from a particular village that were dear friends, almost like brothers, dear friends, that had came forth. And after they came in upon one of their conquests, and I should say, Plecotus loved these two young men, probably because he lost two sons, and they just seemed so connected. But after they had gone out to a war or come back in, they were stopping by this beautiful river. And it says there was a woman there. Well, the woman, it turns out, was actually his wife. Because the wife, after she had been taken to whatever land this was by the man all of a sudden got sick and died. So she was preserved, unharmed, had not been defiled. Well, she had simply worked and was just a very humble servant, knowing that God would restore one day everything that he had taken. So it says she was passing by a tent, and these two young men were speaking in the tent. And she just happened to overhear them. And the conversation was, we're from the same village, but, what do you remember, tell me about your life. We'd never had this conversation. And one said, well, all I can really tell you is when I was a boy, I remember my father was in the military, and we were on a ship with my mom and my brother and my dad, and we were traveling, and next thing we know, my mom was being taken away in a ship. My father cried, and we were getting ready to cross over a river. My dad took one of us over, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know, I was taken away, I think by a wolf, something along those lines. I saw my brother taken away. And fortunately, or thank God, I was raised by farmers. They saw the wolf, they killed it, and they raised me as their own. The other one said, I was the one that was taken by the lion. We're brothers. They had no idea. Now all of a sudden their mom is outside the tent listening to these two being restored. She didn't say anything. She didn't go into the tent. All she requested, she went before this grand general, who she didn't realize was her husband, and said, can you please just give me safe passage back to Rome? I'd like to go back. And in hearing the name of this general, who was, of course, all dressed and such, again, I realized, oh my God, this is my husband. They're my kids. God has truly restored our family. So she went back in front of the general and said, would you indulge me? Just a simple handmaiden, but would you indulge me? Your name is Placidas or Placidas. You were baptized together with your wife and children. You were in this conversation service. And he's looking at her, and that's when it was revealed that was his wife. And of course, great celebration. And then he said, but our children, our boys, let me tell you what happened after you were taken away. And he listened, or she listened. She said, but our boys are here. Let me tell you what happened after they were taken from you. Well, the story continues where they were restored. And you have both the wife and the boys being restored back to the husband and father. They go back to Rome with great celebration because their family had been restored. They were the victors in war. Great, great celebration. The emperor that had been reposed, the new emperor, of course, in receiving folks back, expected that they offer sacrifice to the gods, to thank them for preserving Rome, and thanking them for having restored this family. Well, of course, Eustachio and his family wanted nothing to do with offering pagan gods. He said, no, our God is the Christian God. He said, well, don't you want to thank the gods for having restored your family? No. God has fulfilled the promise that our things will be restored, and we are, in fact, Christian. The emperor, being so frustrated, had him tortured. And it says at first they were going to cast the family into an arena with animals. And as we know in other accounts too, the animals came around this holy family and just cowered. They were there, and they had approached them a bit aggressive, and they would just settle and be calm and turn away. Well, that was not, of course, pleasing to the emperor, who then decided that they be put into this bull, and it would be sealed, and then they'd be burned alive. That would be a fitting torture for them, which is reminiscent of the 3 holy youths being put into the fire of the book of Daniel. So it says they were cast into this furnace that was heated and would burn for several days. But for them it was like dew. It wasn't cold, it wasn't hot. They just remained. And it says they all together peacefully gave up their spirits. Several days later, when the fire would have calmed, it says the emperor went to have the remains taken out, and they found them completely intact, as if they had just been sleeping. And what I appreciate at the end of the story is that, let me see the line here. All the people cried out, "Great is the God of the Christians! Thus the emperor returned in humiliation to his palace, and all the people reviled him for his cruelty and for having needlessly put to death a general so indispensable to Rome. Which is, I think, just so clever. That the people were applauding the God of the Christians, but also frustrated. You took away one of our greatest generals. And for what reason? But it says the bodies of the saints were then buried with fitting reverence. So, to transition us now a little bit. Are we okay on time, Father?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So Saint Efstathios and his holy companions, or his wife and children, have been venerated from the earliest of centuries then forward. In the East, he's referred to as the Holy and Great Martyr Eustathios. Those are not just saint, right? The Holy and Great Martyr. In the West, saint one would be Efstathios, another in India would be Saint Efstathios, because we have their commemoration really reaching all over the globe. I was attempting to figure out where the relics were and at least putting together some of the history, and it was interesting that in ancient Rome there was a church built in his honor, which would be logical, the place of his martyrdom, and that's probably where the remains were. In the 9th century, this church became known as Saint Eustachio in Rome, and was later referenced as a titular church of a bishop. And what that means is our cardinals, or Roman Catholic cardinals around the world, all have to be tied to one of these historical churches in Rome. So in San Francisco, Cardinal Carleone, Archbishop Carleone, he's Archbishop. No, who's the Cardinal? Dolan in New York, that we hear in the news sometimes. He's tied to one of these historical churches of Rome. So even though he's in New York, he's still seated at one of these historical churches. So Saint Efstathios had his church as one of those particular churches. It says that his relics were there for some centuries. It said maybe until the 12th century. That was what one site said. But his relics then were transferred to the Church of St. Denis in Paris as late, or possibly as late as the 11th century. That was interesting. And as we were speaking before, I was thinking, okay, well, the reason of this transfer was probably the same reason that our relic of St. Anne ended up in France, because of Charlemagne. You're pretty logical. If you're attempting to establish a reign, or you want it to be blessed by God, what do? You bring in relics. Because we saw that in Constantinople starting in the 4th century. There's a monastery at Mount Athos that is a dependency of the Great Lavra, and it was built by Athanasius the Athenite in the 10th century, that is also dedicated to Saint Efstathios. Today they're known for their winemaking. They've got a beautiful vineyard and they're known for winemaking. But I believe they have a relic of him there as well. So the 11th century Parisian Church of St. Denis had portions of his relics, but his bones were burned by the Huguenots in the 16th century, so only a portion of his relics remained there. There is also a 13th century Church of St. Efstathios there in Paris as well, that also has a portion of his relics. There's a 12th century head reliquary that comes from the 4th century Church of St. Basil in Switzerland, now in the British Museum. And as I was sharing also, sometimes with reliquaries we might see like an entire arm of a saint, or we see like a silver reliquary, and we see a section of the bone. Well, it doesn't mean they have the entire arm. It means they have a portion of the bone. So it could be just what they have underneath is just that big section or a little section, but it's from the bone, or from the arm. So they have this head reliquary of Saint Efstathios that's in the British Museum. Let's see, he is also the patron saint of hunters and firefighters in the West. Coming out of 14th century Rhineland, he is considered one of the 14 helpers. So as folks were going through illness, they would look to Saint Eustachio, Barbara, Blaise, Catherine, Christopher, Kyriakos, Dionysius, Erasmus, George, Guile, Margaret of Antioch, Pandalemon, and Vitus, as well as Eustathios for healing. So kind of a unique grouping within the West. He's the patron saint of Madrid, Spain. There's actually a Dutch island that's in the Caribbean, Saint Eustace or Saint Eustathios that's there. Yeah, which is unique, right? There's an entire, well, it's not uncommon. Again, we have these names. Nico was showing me his presentation the other evening on one of the gentlemen from the Alamo, who's revered. And it was talking about the troops of Santa Anna coming up. I said, well, Santa Anna, I said, you realize that's Saint Anna, right? And that in California, we get this big Saint Anna winds that blow up from Southern California and so on. Because it's not uncommon these early missionaries took names that they were familiar with that were significant and then laid them on top of lands or on top of breezes or churches and the such. And additionally, which I thought was really interesting, that image up on top of the deer with the cross became the logo for Jägermeister, an alcohol. And the reason for that was because Jägermeisters, at the time of this, when this alcohol was created in Germany, those were the gamekeepers in Germany. So they thought that was a fitting way of protecting and honoring Saint Efstathios for being a hunter, but also asking his protection over hunters in Germany. Interesting. Right? So, reading through, and this will be the last point on Saint Efstathios, it is interesting. I was reading through some other sites online. There's so many interesting things to read, but again, just because something's online doesn't make it right. And it's curious, as they've done with other saints too, you find folks that are skeptics that will say, well, his life is similar to the life of, which means he probably really didn't exist. And I find that incredibly insulting. In that, we have a living history in land, from land to land, of not just Saint Eustathios, but of the apostles. Well, Saint Thomas really didn't travel to India. Well, how do we know he didn't? Why would the Church of India claim, why would the last name of Christians in India be either Thomas or Matthew for the vast majority of them? It's not just for the sake of claiming some sort of authenticity, it's because this might have what really happened. So for our purposes, Saint Efstathios and his holy companions are alive and well. Commemorated by the church on September 20th, and earlier this year, Father Luke and I were speaking, and I visited your church some years ago when Father was first assigned, and came in here and spent some time and just taken with the chapel, and said, wouldn't it be great if we could get a relic of Saint Efstathios for the chapel? Said, absolutely. So it's funny you mention that, because I'm currently working with a dear friend who's attempting to identify a few relics for our community as well. Would you mind if I ask him? Of course, please. So it was quick, and I said, Saint Efstathios. I said, yes. Not Saint Efstathios. No, Efstathios. I said, okay. Feast day is September 20th. Okay, good. So then I was reaching out to a dear friend and saying, is there any chance you could help us locate a relic of Saint Efstathios? The Great and Holy Martyr? Yes. Okay, let me try. And in having a handful of conversations, from a few folks in Jerusalem to a few folks in the Greek Isles, was able to identify a location in Greece, a monastery in the Greek Isles, that had a relic of Saint Efstathios. And that's about as specific as we can be. And the reason for that is, unfortunately today, when folks receive relics, or when folks gift relics, all of a sudden folks can get inundated with requests. So some of our monasteries today have become very quiet in making gifts and saying, please, just don't share where it's from. Receive it with our prayers and our love. We're happy to have it documented somewhere for you. But we'd rather keep this a bit anonymous. Because if we're gifting out of a relationship with you, then there's a fair chance we're going to be requested by others too. And I remember receiving that email, and then being able to tell Father Luke, we found one. And this convent, sisterhood, would be pleased to offer this to your community. When I was in Cyprus, this past November or October, is when we received this relic, and it's been in Roseville, our parish, in our altar for the past several months, in anticipating this trip here. And so the last time, maybe we can expand by an extra 5 minutes, if that's okay? Is just to have you start thinking about, having looked at the life of Saint Efstathios, having looked at the concept of shrine and the importance of relics. Now, one of the lines I forgot, that's one of my favorites with relics, is if we were to go out into the sun Texas sun in the middle of the summer, without any sort of sunscreen on, anything and such. We go outside, there's a fair chance we're going to get burned. When we come into a building after that, we're still going to be burned. Right? Our skin doesn't somehow lose the radiance of the sun because we've come inside. Writers of the early church said it's the same thing with relics. Right? They were so filled with God's grace during their life that it's illogical to think that that grace would leave those bones in death. So having something in your midst that isn't just a container of God's grace, but is really part of this living structure of hymnography and iconography, becomes your offering really to Houston. And I imagine if you go back, predating Father Luke, probably some of you in the community here, and how special it was to even have the thought of having a chapel on site, what the intention was. If we were to go into the naming of the chapel, there's a significant story as to why the chapel bears the name of Eusthathios. Receiving a relic, or I should say having a parishioner do the iconography here, which is just beautiful, and the life being depicted and how the space is used, is part of your living history. Receiving a relic of Saint Efstathios becomes part of your living history, and the question is, what do you do with it? What kind of ministry can you manifest? So just as there's thoughts, what stands out from the life of Saint Efstathios that you think would be important to the Houston community? Don't even just think Orthodox community, but what from his life that we recounted, be it in iconography, or what we shared, that would be important to your Houston community? Any lessons learned that would be important to communicate to those that might be struggling with or in the midst of? So for folks, you could almost envision then a ministry to those that have lost through his prayers. And what kind of a prayer service could be crafted? What kind of a ministry of a benevolent or a grief and bereavement group that includes prayers and asking for healing through the prayers of Saint Efstathios. Okay, there's one.
Maybe healing missing people.
Oh, clever. And Father Luke and I were talking about that today. Houston, like Sacramento, are good centers of human trafficking. Right? So how special it is that you have one whose boys were missing and wife was missing, trafficked, and one says the wife being trafficked. Maybe there's merit to elevating him and having the parish take a little bit of a lead in being a place of solace for families that have lost, and of creating some sort of a ministry for those who are being trafficked, to come out of that, to be found. What else? No one here in Texas hunts.
We didn't want to say it. We've been thinking about that for a time.
Does the Houston Jägermeister Association?
But how amazing is it too? Saint Efstathios, who's noted in the West for being a protector of hunters. Right? How cool is it to be able to say to community, saying, we have a relic of Saint Efstathios that was a general in the Roman army